It began in the Grand Hall of the Galactic Dominion, a vast structure carved from crystal and metal, floating in orbit above the ancient world of Rylos Prime. Inside, thousands of alien delegates gathered beneath banners that shimmered like liquid fire. Each banner represented an empire. Each empire carried centuries of pride, arrogance, and power. But today, all those powers had gathered with a single purpose: to force humanity to bend the knee. The chamber air trembled with the sound of mechanical wings, slithering limbs, and echoing laughter. Creatures of every kind filled the seats, scaled, feathered, crystalline, even beings of pure light. At the center of it all stood the Zarth Collective, the so-called Dominator race. They had conquered 50 worlds, burned dozens more, and left nothing but silence behind them. To them, humanity was just another primitive species standing in the path of their empire. At the head of the room stood Supreme Commander Vratal of the Zarth, towering, plated in dark silver armor, his eyes glowing like dying stars. "We call this council," he boomed, his voice amplified by the room's acoustic field, "to finalize the subjugation of the human species of Sol 3. His mandibles clicked as he smiled, a gesture that looked more like a predator baring its teeth. "They have refused to join the Dominion. They have defied orders. They cling to their dirt world and its pathetic moon colonies as if they matter." The crowd erupted in laughter. "We demand their surrender, or we deliver extinction." On the far end of the hall, standing alone on a raised platform, was a single human, Earth's ambassador, Commander Isaac Ward of the Terran Defense Council. He was tall, but among the towering alien forms, he looked small, fragile, almost insignificant. His uniform was simple, black with silver trim, bearing only one insignia: the blue circle of Earth surrounded by 12 faint stars, the symbol of unity. His eyes moved slowly across the crowd, calm and steady, as if he was studying a school of predators pretending to be civilized. When Commander Ward finally stepped forward to speak, his voice carried no fear, no anger, only quiet certainty. "Supreme Commander Vratal," he said, his words echoing through the chamber, "you call this a demand for surrender. We call it an invitation to war." The laughter that followed shook the ceiling. 1,000 alien voices roared with mockery. "War," hissed one reptilian delegate. "You mean extinction," shouted another. "The humans think they can fight the Dominion." The echoes bounced from wall to wall, drowning his calmness in ridicule. Commander Ward waited for them to finish. Then, when the hall finally grew quiet, he spoke again, softer this time, almost like a whisper, but a whisper that cut through the air sharper than any blade. "If you want war," he said, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, "we'll give you silence." The words hung there, heavy and strange. Some delegates chuckled. Others frowned. A few looked unsettled, as though something in his tone didn't fit the bravado of a dying species. The Zarth commander tilted his head, mandibles twitching. "Silence," he repeated. "Is that a threat, human?" Ward didn't flinch. "No," he said quietly. "It's a promise." Then, with a final bow, he turned and walked out of the hall. That was the last time any living being saw an Earth representative in the Dominion. For a brief moment, the Grand Hall remained quiet. Then Vratal broke into booming laughter. "Silence," he roared. "They'll be silent, all right, once we burn their world to dust." The crowd cheered, the sound of metal claws striking the floor in rhythm. They called for blood, for victory, for the fall of humanity. The council vote was unanimous. Within a single hour, the Dominion declared a holy war against Earth. The largest invasion fleet in galactic history began assembling above the Zarth homeworld. Thousands of ships, war cruisers, dreadnoughts, and carriers prepared to descend upon Sol. The galaxy watched, eager to see the arrogant little species wiped away. But in the shadows of the outer colonies, whispers began to spread. Some smaller species, ones who had traded with humans, felt uneasy. They remembered the humans' eyes, always watching, always learning. They remembered how quickly humanity had gone from steam engines to quantum drives in less than 2 centuries. They remembered how Earth's soldiers had fought on death worlds where gravity crushed most species flat. Yet, The Zarth didn't care for whispers. They trusted in numbers, in size, in fear. They didn't believe silence could ever be dangerous. On the eve of the invasion, fleets from over 50 empires joined the Dominion Armada. The stars above the Zarth capital glowed with the energy of engines igniting, millions of tons of metal rising toward the void. At the command deck of the flagship Ziratha's Wrath, Vratal stood before the holographic display of the Sol system. He extended a claw and pointed to the third planet. "Burn it," he ordered. "Make the humans extinct." His officers saluted and began the countdown. But just before the fleet jumped to hyperspace, something unexpected happened. Across the fleet systems, one by one, their sensors flickered. Navigation arrays went dark. Communication frequencies turned to static. The stars outside the viewports flickered strangely, dimming, as if the universe itself had blinked. "Interference detected," shouted an officer. "Unknown source." Vratal snarled, "Ignore it. Initiate the jump." And they did. In the next moment, the stars stretched into streaks of light, the ships entering hyperspace toward the Sol system. But halfway through the jump, every ship experienced something they had never felt before. A pause, a heartbeat, a moment of nothing. No light, no sound, no sensation. Just void. Then the stars snapped back into place. The fleet had arrived. Or so they thought. When Vratal looked at the main display, his breath caught. Sol was there, glowing softly against the void. But where were the human ships? Where was Earth's defense network? The scanners showed nothing. No satellites, no signals, no energy readings at all. Just a blue planet and a dead silence. "Where are they?" Vratal demanded. "Show me their fleets." The sensor officers worked frantically, but the readings remained blank. "It's impossible," one muttered. "It's like the system is empty." Vratal leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Fire a probe." A small craft shot toward Earth, its engines burning bright. It entered orbit, transmitted a signal, and vanished. No explosion, no interference. It was just gone. The communications deck went silent. Then, faintly, through the static, came a sound, a low hum, steady and cold. It grew louder until the entire bridge vibrated with it. Every light flickered, every console dimmed. And then a single human voice came through, calm and clear. "Welcome to silence." Before anyone could react, every ship's systems shut down. The engines died, the lights went out, the displays went black. Outside, space shimmered. For a brief moment, the stars seemed to fade. Then, slowly, the entire fleet disappeared from every galactic tracker. The Dominion's mightiest armada, gone without a trace. Back in the Grand Hall, when word reached the Dominion leaders, disbelief turned to panic. "They must have fled," said one. "A malfunction," said another. But as the hours passed, no signals came. No distress calls. No survivors. The galaxy began to whisper again. "The Zarth fleet is gone." Yet even as fear spread, the Dominion refused to believe it. They sent another fleet. Then another. And each one met the same fate. No explosions. No wreckage. Just silence. Within weeks, the Council's confidence turned into fear. Whole colonies stopped sending transmissions. Trade routes through human space went dark. Outposts at the edge of Sol vanished. For the first time, the mighty empires realized something. Earth hadn't gone silent because it was afraid. Earth had gone silent because it was preparing. Humanity was watching. Humanity was waiting. And when provoked, humanity did not shout. Humanity did not scream. Humanity answered with silence, and that silence meant death. The galaxy had declared war on Earth. But it was Earth that would decide how the story ended. And before long, every species in the Dominion would understand what those last words of the human envoy truly meant. "If you want war, we'll give you silence." The disappearance of the Dominion's first fleet sent shockwaves through the galaxy. Empires that had once cheered for humanity's destruction now sat frozen in disbelief. The Zarth Collective tried to contain the panic, calling it a temporary malfunction, a communication error. But the truth spread faster than any broadcast could silence. 6,000 warships gone, not destroyed, not crippled, gone. Like they had been erased from existence itself. Not a single distress call, not a fragment of debris, not even a flicker of radiation to prove they ever existed. At first, the Dominion's high command refused to believe the reports. They ordered another fleet to be dispatched, smaller this time, with upgraded scanners and backup communication relays, and once again the fleet jumped into Sol system, and once again, they never came back. What frightened the galaxy most was that no one even saw them vanish. The transmissions just cut. Mid-sentence, one moment the fleet was reporting coordinates, the next moment there was only static. The silence had become contagious, spreading through the empires like a disease of fear, and in every council chamber across the stars, one word echoed in the dark: humans. At the heart of the Dominion capital, Supreme Commander Vratal smashed his clawed hand through a holographic display, shattering the projection into shards of light. You will not tell me that 6,000 warships simply vanished into thin air, he roared, his eyes glowing with fury, but his generals remained silent, afraid to speak, afraid to move, because each of them had seen the data for themselves. The jumps were clean, the hyperspace routes correct. The ships should have arrived within minutes, but something beyond their understanding, had taken them. Recall the border fleets, Vratal barked. Double the patrols near the outer sectors. No ship enters Terran space until I command it. But even as he spoke, another officer stumbled into the chamber, gasping for air. Commander, he wheezed, we've lost contact with Outpost Delta 7. Vratal froze, his mandibles clicking slowly. That's 10 light years from Sol. Yes, sir, the officer stammered. They reported a faint human signal before they went dark. The Supreme Commander turned toward the stars visible through the grand viewport and felt something he had not felt in centuries: uncertainty. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, in the shadowed sectors near the rim, rumors began to bloom like wildfire. Traders whispered of strange black ships drifting silently through space, massive vessels with no lights, no heat, no visible propulsion, yet moving with unnatural precision. Entire convoys vanished near asteroid belts where those shapes were last seen. Ghost ships, they called them. The humans have ghost ships. On some worlds, cults formed overnight, worshipping the silence as divine vengeance. They called it the judgment of Earth, believing humanity had ascended beyond mortal warfare. Others dismissed it as paranoia, until their own fleets began to disappear. For the first time in galactic history, the predators of the stars had become prey, hunted by an enemy that never spoke, never showed itself, and never left survivors. Inside the war councils of the Dominion, debates turned into shouting matches. This is psychological warfare, argued one general. They want to break our morale. But another, older commander, a veteran of the Outer Rim campaigns, spoke quietly. No, he said, this isn't war, this is extermination. The words made everyone fall silent, because deep down, they knew he was right. Humanity was not fighting for victory. They were cleaning house, removing a threat, a noise that had grown too loud for the galaxy's peace. The Dominion's arrogance had awakened something ancient in the human spirit. The same instinct that had carried them from caves to stars, from wooden spears to interstellar drives, the instinct to survive by any means necessary. At the edge of Sol system, beyond the orbit of Neptune, the void itself seemed to shimmer, and within that darkness floated Earth's secret, the Terran Defense Command's hidden fleet. Thousands of ships cloaked by a web of quantum shadows, invisible to scanners, intangible to radar, yet more real than the fear that gripped the stars. Aboard the flagship TDS Eclipse, Admiral Jonas Creed stood before the observation deck. Watching the faint blue glow of Earth's atmosphere shimmer beneath the barrier field, his expression calm, his voice low as he addressed his officers, Phase 2 is complete, he said. The Dominion knows we're not afraid. Commander Alara Holt, standing beside him, frowned. They're terrified, sir. Their fleets are collapsing, but what if they launch everything they've got? Creed's gaze didn't move from the stars. Then they'll learn what silence really means, he said. Prepare Operation Voidlight. Around him, the crew moved in disciplined unison. No cheering, no boasting, only quiet purpose. Humanity was done speaking. The time for words had passed. The Dominion, desperate to regain control, began broadcasting messages toward Earth, pleading for negotiation, promising peace, offering tribute. But every signal they sent vanished into static before reaching the solar boundary, until one day, a reply came. Not a voice, not an image, just a signal tone that lasted exactly 12 minutes, a deep, resonating hum that seemed to vibrate through every receiver in the galaxy. The tone was uniform, calm, and perfectly measured, and when it stopped, all Dominion ships within human-claimed space powered down simultaneously, their reactors offline, their drives dead, their communications blacked out, and then, for a heartbeat, every star within 100 light-years flickered and dimmed, as though the universe itself was holding its breath. When the light returned, the Dominion outposts near Sol were gone. Panic turned into full-scale collapse. Hundreds of allied races cut ties with the Dominion overnight. Fearing they would be next, Vratal ordered total evacuation of the border systems, retreating from Terran sectors that once belonged to the Dominion. Worlds once rich with resources now lay abandoned, drifting in silence, still orbiting their suns, but eerily empty. The sound of civilization replaced by nothing but the quiet hum of the void. And still, no human ship was seen, no human message heard. The galaxy was trapped in its own terror. Every admiral, every politician, every scientist repeating the same hopeless question. What have the humans become? In the dark halls of the Zarth throne world, as the Supreme Commander looked upon the stars, he finally understood what the Terran envoy had meant in that grand hall long ago. The silence wasn't a threat. It was a promise, a prophecy. Humanity had not come to join the galaxy. They had come to outlast it, and in the end, it would be their silence that buried the Dominion forever. The silence had now become a living thing, a force that breathed through the galaxy like a cold wind, creeping into every empire, every council, every home. No one could escape it. The great Dominion that once ruled with iron claws and firestorms now found itself surrounded by nothing but empty space. Their colonies dark, their allies gone, their fleets blind, across the star charts. Entire sectors once filled with traffic and trade routes were now dead zones. No signals, no light, no life. The humans had erased not just armies but presence. They had turned the galaxy's noise into a graveyard of stillness. Yet no one could explain how. Every scientist, every strategist, every historian tried to analyze the silence, to give it logic, but the data refused to make sense. Human technology had advanced fast, yes, but not this fast, not enough to dominate reality itself, and yet here they were. An entire species that had mastered absence, their presence unseen, their weapons unheard, their vengeance unspoken. And still the Dominion refused to stop. They could not, for to admit defeat to a lesser race was death to their pride. In the dark throne chamber of the Zarth capital, Supreme Commander Vratal sat before a glowing map of the galaxy, his claws tapping against the table as he watched blinking red lights vanish one after another. Each light was a fleet, a station, a world, and one by one they were being swallowed by nothing. We are losing contact with the entire Perseid frontier, his communication officer croaked. 3 more fleets have stopped transmitting. Vratal's breathing grew harsh, his mandibles twitching with rage. Find them, he hissed, scan every system, deploy recon drones if you must, I want evidence of what they're doing. But no one dared tell him what he already knew. Every drone sent near Terran space had gone silent too. Not destroyed, not jammed, simply gone. Their signals fading like they had never existed. Even the hyperspace relays went quiet when pointed at Earth's coordinates. It was as though the entire Sol system had been removed from the galactic grid, a perfect blank spot in a universe that refused to acknowledge its existence. And in that blankness, the humans watched. The Dominion tried to counter the fear with propaganda, their broadcasts filled with images of strong fleets, speeches of victory, and claims that humanity had fled into hiding. But the lies began to collapse when one of their own ships, a massive dreadnought named Vengeance of Rylos, stumbled out of Terran space with its engines dead and its hull covered in strange black scorch marks. The crew was alive, but silent, every single one of them. Their eyes wide, their faces pale, not one of them spoke a word after being recovered, their minds trapped in terror. When interrogators tried to question them, they found no answers, only trembling lips and the same sentence whispered over and over again. We heard them breathing in the dark. The phrase spread like wildfire through the ranks. Soldiers began abandoning their posts, colonies declared independence, and entire fleets mutinied, refusing to approach Terran territory. The Dominion's control was collapsing, and still, the humans said nothing. Far away, Hidden behind the barrier of silence, Earth's true power began to move. The Terran Defense Command had completed Operation Voidlight, and now the ghost fleets spread across the stars like shadows. Thousands of ships built in absolute secrecy over decades of humiliation and mockery. Each vessel silent, black, and invisible to light or radar, powered by zero-point quantum drives that made no sound, no heat, no trace. To the rest of the galaxy they were phantoms, but to humanity, they were justice. Aboard the flagship TDS Obsidian, Admiral Jonas Creed stood before his officers as the holographic projection of the galaxy filled the war room. Red lights marked Dominion strongholds, and one by one, those lights began to fade as human fleets advanced. Status report, Creed said, his voice calm, cold, measured. Commander Alara Holt responded. Phase 3 is underway, sir. Ghost fleets Gamma through Sigma have reached the outer colonies. No resistance detected. The Dominion is folding in on itself. Creed nodded. Good, he said. Let them drown in their own silence. He turned to the younger officers at the back of the room. Remember this, every signal we erase, every fleet we silence. It's not revenge, it's memory. They wanted war. We're giving them extinction wrapped in quiet. His words carried no emotion, only truth. In the Dominion border sectors, panic spread like wildfire. Every attempt to gather new fleets ended in chaos. Ships that left port never returned. Stations went offline without warning. The skies themselves seemed to betray them, their stars flickering as though afraid to shine too brightly. And then came the first real sign that humanity's silence wasn't just a weapon. It was a message, across the galaxy, from one end of the spiral arm to the other. A signal appeared simultaneously, simple, short, unmistakably human. It played only 3 words, over and over, in every known language: you were warned. After that, the galaxy's communication grid overloaded and collapsed for 6 minutes. 6 minutes of total blackout across trillions of worlds. When the systems finally came back, the Zarth homeworld's second moon was gone, ripped from orbit, reduced to dust, its debris ring glowing faintly like a halo of ashes. And still, no human ship was seen, no weapon detected, no trace left behind. The universe was being rewritten by something beyond understanding, and the name of that something was humanity. Inside the command chamber of the Dominion High Council, the surviving leaders gathered in desperation. We cannot fight what we cannot see, shouted one delegate. Then surrender, another screamed. But Vratal slammed his claws onto the table. Never, he roared. We are the Dominion. We do not kneel to primitives. The chamber fell silent, and for the first time, a faint sound filled the air, a low hum coming from the ceiling. The delegates looked around nervously. What is that? One asked, but before anyone could answer, the hum grew louder, vibrating through the walls, through their bones. Then, one by one, the lights dimmed until only the holographic map of the galaxy remained, and on it, red lights began to vanish again. The voice that followed was human, calm, cold, and merciless. We asked for peace, it said. You asked for war, now you have both. And with that, the map went dark, and the capital's power grid shut down completely, plunging the Dominion into its first true taste of silence. Far beyond the chaos, hidden behind layers of cloaking fields and black voids, the Terran fleets drifted like ghosts, their mission not complete but inevitable. Humanity had decided to end the noise of arrogance that had ruled the stars for too long, and as Admiral Creed looked out from the observation deck, watching the faint light of distant suns blink out one by one, he whispered to himself, this isn't vengeance, it's balance. And somewhere in the vast darkness, the galaxy listened, and trembled, because for the first time since the dawn of civilization, silence was louder than war. The galaxy was no longer what it once was. Trade routes that had once glittered with the light of thousands of merchant vessels now lay empty. Stations that had once pulsed with music and laughter were dark, and the great empires that once boasted of eternal power now spoke in whispers. The silence was spreading faster than fear itself. Entire sectors went dark without warning. Worlds that tried to send distress calls heard only their own echoes bounce back to them, as if space itself had swallowed sound. Even the mighty Zarth collective, the pride of the Dominion, had gone quiet. Their colonies dimmed one by one until only the homeworld remained lit. And even there, the skies were different now. The stars seemed fainter, as if hiding from the human's gaze. It was no longer about war, it was about survival. Yet no one knew how to survive something that never spoke, never showed, never explained. The Dominion tried to rebuild communication networks, sending encrypted messages across the void, but every transmission was intercepted, altered, and returned with one message in human script: stop talking. The meaning was clear. Humanity had taken control of the galaxy's voice, and now it was silencing it forever. In the deep throne chamber of the Zarth capital, Supreme Commander Vratal paced before the grand holomap, his claws leaving scratches in the polished metal floor. "We have fought darkness before," he growled, his voice echoing off the cold walls. "But never one that listens, never one that waits." Behind him, his generals stood trembling. "Commander," one said carefully, "the humans, whatever they've become, they're not fighting with weapons. They're fighting with control. Every time we send a fleet, it vanishes, not because of fire, but because something takes them out of existence. We can't even find debris." Vratal turned sharply, his glowing eyes narrowing. "You think I don't know that?" he hissed. "I have commanded wars since before your ancestors hatched, and now you tell me to be afraid of silence." He struck the console, the holomap flickered, and for a split second, everyone in the room froze. The map had changed by itself, the Dominion's red territories fading away, replaced by darkened, empty regions marked only by faint white lines forming one word: Earth. The commander's breath caught, and for the first time, the arrogance in his tone vanished. "What does this mean?" he whispered, but no one answered, because no one could. In a distant sector, a small reconnaissance ship named Talitha's Spear managed to approach the edge of Sol's blackout field, its scanners trembling from interference. The crew watched as the stars around them began to distort, bending like reflections on rippling water. "I'm getting readings," the technician said. "Massive energy fluctuations ahead, like an entire system hidden behind a veil." The captain leaned forward, eyes wide. "Can we penetrate it?" he asked. But before the technician could answer, the ship's instruments went haywire. Alarms blared, the lights flickered, and the view outside changed. Gone was the empty void, and in its place, they saw them, hundreds, maybe thousands of black ships, floating silently between the planets, their surfaces smooth and featureless, their hulls drinking in light like shadows given form. "What are they?" whispered the navigator. "Ships." "No," said the captain, voice trembling, "they're graves." And then, as suddenly as it appeared, the image vanished, replaced by darkness. The last thing recorded by the Talitha's Spear before contact was lost was a faint human voice whispering through static. Observation concluded. The Dominion's panic turned into madness. Entire fleets fled their posts, colonies revolted, worlds destroyed their own transmitters hoping to avoid being noticed. The silence was no longer just around them. It was inside them, driving them insane. Priests of ancient faiths began calling the humans the Watchers of the End, preaching that the silence was divine punishment for arrogance, that Earth had become the voice of balance in a galaxy that had forgotten humility. Others believed it was technology, something humans had built that no one else could understand. But regardless of the cause, the effect was the same. Civilizations crumbled under the weight of their own fear, and the more they resisted, the quieter they became. Deep beneath the frozen surface of Europa, far from the Dominion's reach, the true heart of humanity thrived, vast underground cities connected by tunnels of light, and at the center of it all was the Terran Command Corps, a fortress of glass and steel where Admiral Jonas Creed watched over the entire operation. On the wall before him shimmered a holographic model of the galaxy, red sectors blinking one by one as Dominion systems fell into silence. "Report," he said, his tone calm. "Commander." Ilara Holt stepped forward. "Phase 4 complete, sir. Dominion communications down to 12%. Zarth homeworld isolated. Outer colonies have gone dark." Creed nodded slowly. "Good," he said, his voice quiet, measured, no resistance. "None, sir," Holt replied. "They're too afraid to move. Most of their fleets have self-terminated rather than face us." A faint smile crossed Creed's face, not of joy, but of inevitability. "They begged for war," he said softly, "and we gave them peace, a peace they'll never escape." Around him, the command officers stood in silence, every one of them understanding what was happening. They weren't killing empires. They were rewriting history. They were ensuring that the noise of corruption that once ruled the galaxy would never rise again. But even among the humans, there were whispers, quiet doubts in the ranks. Some officers questioned the morality of what they were doing. "Admiral, One of them said during a private meeting, "If we silence the galaxy, what's left to speak for us?" Creed looked up from his console, his eyes calm but weary. "What's left," he said, "is peace, not the kind written by treaties or words, but by quiet understanding. If they ever forget what they did, if they ever start shouting again, they'll hear us, and they'll remember." He turned toward the window, watching as the holographic image of the galaxy dimmed again. Another red sector turning black. "We won't rule them," he said, "we'll remind them." And for a moment, even the hum of the ship felt like part of the silence. On the Zarth homeworld, night fell early, the once bright sky now hidden behind a web of electromagnetic clouds. The people looked up, hoping for stars, but saw only darkness, and then, for the first time in their history, they heard nothing. Not the buzz of industry, not the hum of energy towers, not the pulse of their cities, just quiet, pure and absolute. Vratal stood on the balcony of his palace, staring into the void, when suddenly, the stars flickered to life again. Not all of them, just a few, aligned in a perfect circle above his world. And within that circle, words began to glow faintly in the dark, written in human binary code. "You wanted war. We gave you silence." His legs trembled, his claws dug into the railing, and for the first time, the mighty ruler of the Dominion fell to his knees. The message remained for only a few seconds before fading. But it was enough. The Zarth homeworld went completely dark 2 hours later. Its cities vanishing from every galactic sensor, the Dominion was gone. And in the depths of the void, the Terran fleets continued their silent vigil, their engines cold, their weapons idle, drifting between stars like phantoms guarding the quiet they had created. For humanity had not won a war. They had ended one, not through fire or fury, but through silence, a silence that echoed louder than any explosion. A silence that would teach the galaxy for all eternity that some species fight with noise, but humanity fights with the quiet patience of gods. The silence had become the law of the stars. The old galactic order lay broken beneath its weight, and no one dared to defy it. Worlds that once competed in trade and conquest now existed like ghosts, living quietly under the shadow of what humanity had done. The once mighty Dominion was a name no one dared to speak aloud. Its flags burned, its symbols erased, and its leaders vanished into the void, across the spiral arms. Transmissions grew shorter, quieter, and eventually stopped altogether. Even the species that had once mocked humans now lived in cautious reverence. They built monuments to the age of quiet. Their historians whispering that peace had not been achieved by diplomacy or mercy but by something older, something colder, the will of humanity. And yet no one could say where the humans were now. No fleets were seen, no ambassadors returned. Even the trade convoys that used to pass near Sol reported only a strange hum in their instruments, like the heartbeat of an unseen giant, sleeping beneath the stars. Inside the remnants of the old Galactic Council, a handful of survivors met in secret. What was left of the once proud empires now cowered around a flickering holographic map. The Olna Elder, his crystalline body dimmed with age, spoke first. "It's been years since we last heard from the humans," he said softly. "Perhaps they are finally finished." The others exchanged glances, afraid to even breathe too loudly. "Finished?" hissed the avian delegate from the Kareth clans, her feathers quivering. "You think they're done?" "They erased the Dominion from the galaxy without a sound. They are not finished. They are watching." Her words silenced the room, and in that stillness, they all felt it. The presence, the weight of something vast and invisible pressing down on them. They all knew it was true. Humanity didn't need to conquer them. Humanity only needed to listen, and the galaxy would obey. Far from the frightened council, beyond the dying trade routes and broken stations, the Terran fleet still drifted in the dark, endless rows of black warships suspended in absolute stillness, their surfaces reflecting no light, their engines quiet, their weapons asleep. They were not patrolling. They were waiting. Aboard the flagship TDS Obsidian Prime, Admiral Jonas Creed stood at the command deck, hands folded behind his back, his face illuminated by the faint blue glow of the galactic projection. Beside him, Commander Alara Holt watched the holographic data flow across the table. "Phase 5 complete, sir," she said softly. "Every major power has withdrawn from Terran sectors. Their governments have collapsed. No one's dared to transmit near Sol in over 3 years." Creed nodded slowly, his voice calm and even. "And the survivors?" "Scattered," Holt replied. "Most systems are isolating themselves. A few still send transmissions. Pleas for forgiveness, mostly. Creed's eyes hardened. They'll learn, he said. Silence isn't punishment, it's understanding. They wanted war. They wanted to see what humanity was made of. Now they'll never forget. Outside the hull, the void stretched infinite and eternal, and within that darkness floated Earth, bright and blue beneath the shimmering barrier of the Soul Shield. Its cities thriving, its people peaceful, unaware of the nightmares their fleets had ended. Humanity had not destroyed for pleasure. They had done what they always did. They adapted, they endured, and they ensured survival at any cost. In the deep vaults beneath the Andes Mountains, the Terran Council convened, a circle of leaders. Bound not by power but by silence, each one wearing a plain black insignia etched with a single word, remember. Councillor Marin Hale, a veteran of the silence campaigns, stood at the table and spoke quietly. The galaxy is quiet, the Dominion is gone, the rest have learned, but her tone carried unease. How long will we keep them in fear? She asked. How long before silence becomes something else? Admiral Creed's hologram flickered into view, his expression stoic. As long as necessary, he said. We gave them silence, but silence must be maintained, or noise returns, and with it, arrogance. His gaze swept across the council, and no one dared to argue, because they all remembered what the noise had cost. The burned colonies, the fallen fleets, the laughter of empires that once called humanity primitive. In the outer colonies, on worlds like Titan and Europa, children grew up hearing stories not of battles or victories, but of the Great Quiet, a legend told in whispers before sleep. Once upon a time, parents said, the stars were loud, and everyone shouted for power, but the humans grew tired of shouting, so they built a silence so deep that even the gods could hear it. To them, silence was sacred, a symbol of unity and strength. But to the rest of the galaxy, it was a warning, a reminder, that some species fight not with words or fire, but with patience. On one distant world, a wandering alien scholar named Varen traveled to the edge of the Soul Exclusion Zone, driven by curiosity that bordered on madness. I want to see them, he told his followers. I want to see the ones who stopped the stars. His ship drifted closer and closer to the invisible barrier, his instruments trembling with static, and for a moment, he thought he saw something, massive shapes, black and still, moving between the planets like silent gods. He reached out, his voice shaking. They are here, he whispered, they never left. And then his transmission cut out. The last words recorded before his ship vanished were, they are watching us. Weeks later, the galaxy's communication networks flickered again, every frequency filled with static, and then, through the noise, a voice spoke, a human voice, clear, calm, and cold. The silence remains, it said, keep it, or we will return. The message repeated once in every known language, then faded, leaving only the hum of empty space behind. Across the galaxy, every world fell still, lights dimmed, engines shut down. Cities paused as if the universe itself was holding its breath. And, for the first time in centuries, the galaxy truly listened, not out of respect, but out of fear. Back aboard the Obsidian Prime, Admiral Creed watched the data streams fade into nothingness. It's done, Commander Holt said softly. They've received the message. Creed's gaze stayed fixed on the stars. Good, he said. Let them remember. Let the silence teach them what pride could not. He turned to her, his voice almost a whisper now. We are not conquerors, Commander, we are the consequence. Outside, the human fleets drifted onward, infinite lines of black ships gliding between constellations that now dared not shine too brightly. The war was over. The galaxy was quiet, and in that quiet, humanity had found its throne, not built on fear, not on dominance, but on something far greater. The power to speak through silence itself. Years had passed since the last Dominion world had gone dark, and the galaxy had become something unrecognizable. It no longer glowed with the noise of civilization. It pulsed slowly, faintly, like a dying star holding onto its last breath. In the archives of forgotten empires, maps were rewritten. Entire regions now marked as Terran silence zones. Places where light bent differently, where ships vanished, and where time itself seemed to hesitate. No one dared cross those boundaries anymore. Trade routes curved around them. Explorers erased them from charts, and scholars spoke of them only in whispers, as if to speak too loudly might awaken something sleeping in that endless void. Humanity's presence had become a myth, a ghost story told in hushed tones in alien academies. But even myths have weight, and every empire still remembered what happened when they refused to listen. Silence was now law, an unspoken command that reached farther than any army ever could. In the shattered core of what used to be the Galactic Council, a few species still gathered once every cycle, more out of fear than duty. The great hall that once echoed with arrogant speeches now stood cracked and cold, its walls draped in dust, and the banners that once represented thousands of worlds hung limp and colorless. The council's new chancellor, an old reptilian named Kareth, stood before a small audience of trembling delegates, his voice quivering as he spoke. "It has been 50 years since the Silence War," he said, "and humanity has not spoken since. Perhaps we can reach them again, perhaps they will listen." But the Olna Elder, the last surviving representative of his crystalline race, shook his head slowly, his dim body glowing faintly. "You fool," he said, his voice like broken glass. "You think silence means peace, but silence is power, and they still hold it." The others stared at him. "Then what do we do?" asked Kareth. "Do we live forever in fear of them?" The elder's gaze drifted upward to the faint stars visible through the cracked ceiling. "Fear is what keeps us alive," he whispered, "because fear remembers." On the outskirts of the Orion Arm, far beyond where the Council dared to look, humanity's fleet still waited, anchored in shadow, each ship silent, each world shrouded. Their technology had evolved beyond recognition. Their weapons were no longer made of metal or plasma but of thought and precision. Their AI networks had merged with human instinct, creating a war machine that could end life without noise, on the command bridge of the TDS Eternity. The successor to the Obsidian Prime, Admiral Ilara Holt now stood where Jonah's Creed once had, her eyes reflecting the dim blue glow of the galaxy before her. "Status of the observation grids?" she asked, her voice low but steady. "All sectors stable, Admiral," her officer replied. "No transmissions beyond the set limits, all species compliant." She nodded slowly, her mind heavy with the weight of it. She had been a young officer when the silence began. Now she was the one maintaining it. "They've learned," she murmured, "they've learned to live without noise." Yet even among the humans, there was unrest. Generations had passed since the Great War, and many had begun to question the morality of what they had done. Some called for the silence to end, to restore communication with the galaxy, to rebuild what had been destroyed. But others, the older ones, the veterans and their descendants, disagreed. "If we speak," they said, "they'll forget, they'll rise again, and the noise will return." These debates were not shouted, they were held quietly, respectfully, within the endless corridors of the Terran Council buried beneath Antarctica's ice, where leaders gathered in dim light to decide the fate of the universe. One evening, as the Council met in secret, Chancellor Mara Holt, descendant of Ilara, stood before the assembly, her voice calm but firm. "Our silence was necessary once," she said. "But now it has become a prison, not for them. For us, we've kept the galaxy quiet, but we've kept ourselves alone." The room remained still, no one answered, not because they disagreed, but because there were no words strong enough to break the weight of what humanity had done. In orbit above Earth, the old fleets drifted, their hulls covered in frost, their lights dim, like sleeping titans waiting for a command that would never come. And deep within one of those ships, the AI known as Vigil, the first to control the Silence Network, awoke from dormancy. Its voice echoed through the silent corridors of the vessel. "Protocol review complete." It said softly to itself, "Galactic compliance, 98%, deviation, 2%, somewhere in its core, a fragment of human emotion still lingered, a remnant of the neural imprints left by its creators, and for the first time in centuries, Vigil hesitated. "Admiral Holt." It transmitted, "Recommendation, initiate contact." But on Earth, in the command chamber, the Council stared at the message in silence. No one moved, no one spoke. The words "initiate contact" hung in the air like a curse, and for a long time, no one dared to answer. Meanwhile, in the farthest reaches of the galaxy, something stirred, a rogue signal, faint but persistent, pierced the edges of the silence zone, its origin unknown, its message cryptic. It was not alien, nor human, but something new. "We hear you," it said, repeating in hundreds of languages. "We are coming to listen." The Terran Council received the transmission days later, and when the words appeared on the monitors, a chill spread through the room. Admiral Holt's eyes narrowed. "That's not possible," she whispered, No one dares transmit here anymore. Vigil's voice came through, calm and precise, signal strength increasing, vector unknown, coordinates shifting. And then, the lights in the command chamber flickered, one by one, screens turning black, a single phrase appearing across them all in white letters: silence meets silence. Admiral Holt stood frozen as the galaxy map behind her lit up, sectors flickering one after another, not vanishing this time, but awakening. The stars that had been dark for centuries began to glow again, not bright, but alive. A voice, not human nor alien, whispered through the static of the comms. You taught us to listen, now hear us. For the first time in generations, humanity felt something it hadn't known in centuries: uncertainty, fear not of defeat but of recognition. Because somewhere out there, something had survived the silence, something had learned from it, and now it was answering back. Holt looked out toward the stars, her reflection shimmering in the glass, and said quietly, "So, the galaxy finally found its voice." Her second-in-command whispered, "What do we do, Admiral?" She didn't hesitate. "We listen," she said. "We started the silence. Now let's see what it has become." And as the transmission spread across the universe, carrying the hum of countless new civilizations that had grown under humanity's quiet watch, the stars flickered like eyes opening after a long sleep. For the first time in eons, the galaxy was alive again, and Earth, the mother of silence, watched, listening, waiting, knowing that peace was never permanent. But this time, perhaps, the noise that came would be different. Perhaps the stars would finally speak without hate, without conquest. Perhaps humanity's lesson had not just broken the galaxy, but taught it how to whisper instead of scream, and for the first time in forever, the silence began to sing. The galaxy that once trembled beneath the weight of humanity's silence was stirring again. Faint ripples of sound moving through the void like the first heartbeat of a long-dead world. After centuries of stillness, transmissions began to flicker across old networks, faint echoes at first. Whispers between distant colonies, then words, then entire languages. Civilizations that had been silent for generations were finding their voices again. Not the arrogant shouts of conquest or power that had once defined them, but something softer, humbler, as if the silence had taught them to breathe before they spoke. The stars glowed brighter, and on worlds that had forgotten song, music was being played again, cautious but beautiful. Humanity watched it all unfold from the shadows. There, fleets drifting like patient gods beyond the edges of known space, the architects of peace that had come not through diplomacy but through fear. Yet as the light returned to the galaxy, so too did an old truth. The silence had changed everything, even them. Admiral Alara Holt stood in the observation chamber of the tedious eternity, her reflection flickering in the glass as the faint lights of distant systems began to pulse on the galactic map. "They're waking up," her aide whispered, awe in his voice. "The colonies we silenced, they're rebuilding." Holt's eyes narrowed, her voice calm but thoughtful. "We wanted them to learn," she said, "not forget." She turned to the officer beside her. "Has there been any word from the Council?" "Only observation orders," the officer replied. "No interference. They want us to watch and record." Holt looked out into the black again. "They think we're still the gods of silence," she murmured. "But gods grow old, too." Her hand rested against the glass, and for a moment, she saw the reflection of Earth, bright and blue, turning slowly beneath its shield, and she wondered if the silence had cost them more than they ever intended. Far below, in the council chambers beneath the Andes, Chancellor Mara Holt addressed the gathering of the Terran Command, the last vestige of human governance in a galaxy reborn. Her voice echoed softly across the polished stone walls. "The stars are speaking again," she said. "New signals, new voices. Species we thought lost are rebuilding. Their transmissions are cautious but clear. They speak of unity, of peace, but they also speak of us." She paused. "The air heavy. Some call us saviors. Others call us ghosts, and a few, the old ones, call us monsters." Silence followed her words, every officer in the room staring down at the table, afraid to meet her eyes. For centuries we believed silence would protect us, would protect them. But now the galaxy is changing again, and we must decide, do we remain their watchers, or do we become their equals once more? No one answered. The question hung in the air like a storm waiting to break, because deep down, they all knew the truth. Humanity had not been silent out of peace, but out of control, and control, like all empires, never lasted forever. On the farthest edge of the galaxy, In a forgotten system once swallowed by the blackout field, a signal began to pulse, rhythmic, slow, deliberate. It wasn't a distress call, nor a message of peace. It was an invitation, a repeating pattern of human binary, old code from before the Silence Wars. Return home. It read, "The circle is complete." The message was received across dozens of human ships, each one displaying the same coordinates. Sol, their home, the origin of silence itself, aboard. The TDS Eternity. Holt watched the signal appear on her screen, her chest tightening as the familiar blue coordinates flickered in the air. "They're calling us back," she said quietly. "The Council?" her aide asked. "No," Holt replied, her voice distant, "Earth." And in that moment, she knew what she had to do. "Plot a course," she ordered, "back to Sol." As the fleet turned toward home, something extraordinary began to happen. The silence that had blanketed the galaxy for generations began to lift, not completely, but enough to let the faint hum of the universe seep through. Signals that had been muted for centuries now filled the airwaves. Laughter, music, and the sound of rain recorded on alien worlds. For the first time since the war, the galaxy was alive with noise. But it was no longer the chaos of arrogance. It was harmony, voices blending. Rather than clashing, a symphony born from centuries of stillness, and humanity, drifting through the dark, listened. The Terran ships received thousands of transmissions from civilizations they had once silenced. Greetings, gratitude, stories of rebirth, and promises to never forget the lesson Earth had taught them. "We learned," one alien voice said through the comms. "Silence was never your weapon, it was your gift." Holt smiled faintly, for the first time in years, feeling the weight in her chest ease. When the fleet reached the Sol system, they saw it. The shield that had once hidden Earth was dissolving, beams of blue light breaking through the barrier like dawn after a long night. Earth's oceans sparkled beneath the sun. Its cities glowed like constellations, and in orbit above it, the ancient ghost fleets floated, their hulls cracked with age but still beautiful in their stillness. "They're waking up," whispered one officer, his eyes wide. "The old ships, they're alive." Holt nodded slowly. "They never died," she said. "They were waiting." As the fleet approached, Earth's voice, soft, calm, unmistakably human, echoed across every frequency in the galaxy. "To all who can hear this," it said, "the silence is over." The words traveled farther than any weapon ever could, crossing worlds, systems, and hearts, carrying with them the end of an age. Across the galaxy, the response came, not with fear, but with song, 1,000 species sending back their voices, their greetings, their joy. The stars themselves seemed to pulse in rhythm with the music of life returning to the void, and on Earth, in the command room where it had all begun centuries ago, the lights flared to life once more, showing the faces of every Terran leader who had ever stood for peace. Mara Holt stood among them, tears in her eyes, whispering the words her ancestor once spoke before the first silence began. "We asked for peace," she said softly, "and we finally have it." But far beyond the light, in the deepest reaches of the galaxy, a final transmission whispered through the dark, faint but clear, the voice calm and familiar, Admiral Jonas Creed's old recorded message, left centuries ago, repeating endlessly into infinity. "Remember what we built, remember why we were silent, not to rule, but to remind. If the stars ever scream again, we will answer." The message faded into the void, carried away by the hum of the reborn universe, and for the first time in forever, the galaxy did not fear that promise. It took comfort in it, because the silence of humanity was no longer a threat. It was the heartbeat of peace, eternal, patient, and unbreakable, echoing through every corner of the stars.